Welcome back to Unintentionally Frenchified. Today I'm launching part 2 of what not to do when you're visiting the US. So if you haven't seen part 1, you can check it out here. But today I've got 7 new really great tips to share with you. As always, I love hearing in the comments below what you agree with, what you disagree with. If you have any tips for people that you think I should have added to my list, please let me know below. I'm hoping that this video will be very useful when we can all start traveling again safely. Before we jump into my what not to do when visiting the US, I have some really faboosh news for all of my viewers out there that are looking to start learning a new language or to majorly accelerate their language learning journey. Lingoda has another great 100% cashback sprint starting in September. Woo woo! Over 30,000 people have participated in the Lingoda Language Sprints, and the results are crazy good. You don't just have to take my word for it. If you go and check out their Instagram, you can get some feedback from a ton of alumni sprinters about how their sprint went. But just remember that Lingoda Language School is the #1 trusted online language school, and that didn't happen for nothing. You guys all know that my favorite things about Lingoda are definitely the super small class sizes. I'm learning Spanish right now and I haven't had more than 4 people in my class, and on average there's usually 3. And of course I love the teachers. They are so kind and patient and of course incredibly knowledgeable because they're all native speakers. And of course, who doesn't love learning in their PJs? So I love taking classes from my bed. It is so flexible. I've listed all the nitty-gritty details that you've got to know about the sprint in the description below, so check that out. But just keep in mind that the sprint starts on September 30th and sign-up closes on September 8th. There is the super sprint, which is 30 classes a month for 3 months, and you get 100% cash back. But you also have the sprint, which is 15 classes a month for 3 months, and you get 50% cash back. Both plans require a €49 deposit to secure your spot, which is really important because they do run out of spots and spots are limited. And what's really great is I've got a voucher code so you can get €10 off of your deposit. So don't forget to check that out when you're signing up. It doesn't matter where you are in your language journey, if you are super advanced, if you're a complete beginner, if you're somewhere swimming in between, this is a great opportunity for everybody. Keep in mind, it only takes 66 days to learn a new habit. So this is the right time to hop on a sprint and know at the end of the 3 months, hopefully we'll all start being able to travel safely again and you can put all of this language learning to good use. Don't miss all the details, including the voucher code below, and otherwise, let's jump into the things, 7 of them, that you should not do when visiting the US. First things first, don't forget to tip. Guys, this is so rude when you actually forget. And I know it can be super confusing, and I understand that it's like, when do you tip? When do you don't tip? How much should I be tipping? And when you're not used to the tipping culture, it can be really confusing. But in the US, it's really important to remember that most servers, people working in restaurants, bartenders, they live off of their tips. So their minimum hourly wage is very small. It's not enough to live on because a majority of what they're making is coming from tips. So when you get good service and you don't tip, you're really screwing somebody over. So it's really important to keep in mind that tipping in the US is very important. So, general rule of thumb to give you some ideas of when you tip. We tip when you're in a restaurant, if you're in like a bar or a lounge and you're sitting down and someone's serving you drinks. We tip for taxis and cars and ride shares. If you're getting like a personal service, so for example, a salon, getting your hair done, getting a massage, getting a tattoo, we would tip for that too. And also some smaller things like if someone helps with your luggage at the hotel or at the airport or housekeeping, we tend to leave a bit of tip as well. So in a general rule, I looked this up since I haven't lived in the US in a long time and I wanted to make sure the numbers were right. But on average, most people tip for the smaller stuff like your luggage or housekeeping, somewhere between $2 to $5 that they give. And then if it's a restaurant or a bar, you're sitting down and you're eating or you're drinking, that's more about 15 to 20% of the bill, of the cost of your meal before tax. You don't necessarily have to include tax in your 15 to 20%. I think it kind of depends. And of course, the idea is that you're tipping them because you had good service. It's up to your own discretion if the service isn't very good. But one of the great things about living in the US is because people live off of tips, often the service is pretty good. Don't talk about very polarizing subjects. If I were you, I would really stay away from things like gun control, politics, abortion. I mean, these really polarizing subjects where people have their points of view and they're very passionate, is the right word maybe, about their points of view. In France, the French love a good debate. And I have been at dinner parties where we've spent hours debating about things and people have very different point of views and they're, really snapping at each other and debating and giving their point of view. And then when it's over, it's done. And the rest of the night just kind of carries on and nobody really thinks about the debate. I would say the general American doesn't have this type of mindset. We tend to be less of a debate culture, and we also tend to have our points of view and be very passionate, which ends up being very aggressive, and then we kind of don't forget what was said during a debate. And obviously I'm generalizing, but if you're going to just visit the US and you don't know people very well there, I think it's just super important to stay away from polarizing subjects. If you know people really well, go for it if you feel comfortable, but I don't know, it's really not a good idea to go into a bar, to drink a little bit too much, to start talking to the American next to you and start bringing up, I don't know, their political points of views. The climate in the US about politics is really polarizing right now, and I feel like you're gonna get yourself into a conversation that's way more aggressive and maybe like borderline violent if there's alcohol than you had really expected. So I would just say shy away, don't really involve yourself in the super polarizing subjects. I just don't think it's worth it on vacation. Do not respond honestly when someone asks, "How are you?" Somebody you don't know, of course. So when you walk into places like restaurants and stores in the US, we have a greeting in the US where we just say like, "Hello, how are you?" And we're not expecting an honest response back. So normally what I say is like, "I'm fine, thank you." And I keep walking if it's a store, or I give my name for the reservation. But I've never been like, "Actually, I've had a really crap day and I just want to talk to somebody about it." I don't even know if the person who's asking would know how to respond. So I would just say tip. It's just a polite way of greeting people in the US. They're not really respecting a response back. And I know French people are like, well, then why do they say it? But it's just kind of like the way in France you absolutely have to say bonjour to people. Often you're going to get a "Hi, how are you?" and just give a little "I'm fine, thank you," and keep going along your business and you will be just fine. Don't think the price you see is the actual price. Ugh. Sales tax is one of the most annoying things I find when I actually go back to the US now. So something to keep in mind is that the price that you see on something is not actually the final price. It's the price without sales tax. And sales tax is added when you go up to the cashier. It's really, I can't go into detail about how much it is because this really differs by state. And this is also kind of the reason that I've at least read that we don't include sales tax in the final ticket prices, because it changes depending on where you're actually selling the goods. But in general, you just have to know that you can't really like count your change out exactly before you get up to the cashier, because you never know how much is going to be added on. And of course, when it's like a candy bar that costs like $2, it's not a big deal for the extra 5 cents. But when you're going to buy like a $2,000 like electronic and they add like $250 on top, you're like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. So it's super frustrating, but just don't ever think that the price that you see is really the final price, because there's always going to be sales tax added on, and if you're in a restaurant then you've got to add that tip on, so there's just some extra things at the end that you have to figure out. Don't generalize all Americans. I feel like this shouldn't surprise any of the French people out there, because people hate when we talk about Parisian things and we call them French things, and I get this on a lot of my videos if I ever make this mistake, so you shouldn't be too surprised to know that Americans don't love it either. It's so large, the US, and there's so many states, and in every state you've got your own culture and your own history and often your own vocabulary, your own way of doing things, and so it's normal. But someone from California isn't necessarily going to love being compared to somebody from Massachusetts, because maybe there's a lot of similarities, but maybe there's a lot of differences. I always talk to my husband about this because he'll say things like, yeah, well, in the US, you can just, when you drive, it's always straight. And like for hours, we go straight and we're never going up and down. And I'm like, yes, because I'm from the Midwest. And when we go home to visit my family, we're surrounded by cornfields and it's flat. But if you were asked, like my friends in Colorado, if driving is straight and flat, they'd say no because there's so many mountains. So just keep in mind that the US is huge, and just like France, there's so many different regions and ways of doing things, and depending on where you're visiting and where you're going, your experience could be very different from somebody else visiting a different part of the US. So just, try not to generalize as much as you can, which is kind of funny because I'm literally generalizing right now in this video about Americans, but what can I do? Don't walk in someone else's yard. So this one sounds like super bizarre, but I've actually seen people get in like shouting matches about people walking in their yard. And when I'm saying yard, I'm not talking about like acres of land. I'm talking about literally like a tiny little yard in front of their house. So it sounds crazy, but it's really, I think, more common than you could imagine. So in the US, technically it is illegal to walk on somebody else's lawn, no matter how big or how small it is. It's actually called trespassing. But I did a bit of research, and just FYI, there is like a slim to no chance that you would ever get a ticket from the police or get in actual trouble for walking on someone else's lawn. However, you might encounter a very aggressive person who takes it very seriously that you're walking on their lawn. So just in general, if you're meandering around towns where you're walking on people's streets, I wouldn't walk in their grass if I can avoid it. And if you're bringing like your dog along, for example, I wouldn't let them do their business in somebody else's grass. And if they do, I would just like pick it up obviously quickly and like kind of skedaddle out of there. It sounds like something so small, but it's really actually, I think, kind of like more important than you would think. So just stick to the sidewalks, look at the houses from afar, and you'll be good to go. Don't say the US has no history or no culture. So I do get this quite a bit more than you would think in France. Sometimes when I'm like, oh, I'm homesick for a bit of American culture or history or something, and I get the response like, do you want to go eat a cheeseburger? Or like, wait, you mean the 200 years of history in the US versus like the 1,000 years of history that you have here in France? And I'm like, okay, yes, I get it. We do not have the same like long history that you have in Europe, and you're not like most certainly not going to find like middle-aged buildings on every corner like you can see here. But we still do have some like historical and cultural things to be proud of in the US. We've got, great music like the blues and jazz, and we've got Hollywood films, and we do have our own cuisine, and we've got amazing like writers and poets, and we have great like top international schools for education. We do have some things to be proud of, guys. Well, of course we have many things to tweak. It's not all bad. And I think it's very much part of the French kind of like persona and personality to have a little bit of superiority, not just over Americans, but over just everybody, and think France is the best. So I do understand that, that's just kind of the natural thing to do in France, is to kind of criticize. But in the US, we're, as I said, a little bit more sensitive, a little bit less into the criticism. So when you're visiting the US, I would just say leave a little bit of that teasing, like superiority at home, and just try to focus on some of the really cool stuff that you can see in the US. Alright guys, I hope you liked my 7 tips about what not to do when you're in the US. I will love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. What did you appreciate? What do you kind of disagree with? What would you add to the list for everybody? I've now, with part 1 and 2, I've got 14 tips. So please let me know if you think there are other things that I should have added. Leave them in the comments. And don't forget, if you're interested in Lingoda, to check out all the details below in the video description, especially my voucher code. And otherwise, I will see everybody next week. Hope you guys are all having a great summer. Bisous!